is so shocking what the Russian forces have done to kill civilians, to rape women, to torture innocent people. These are war crimes, and people responsible for this are war criminals. And there's only one place for war criminals in the end, that they are held to account in front of an international war crime tribunal.
Mr. McAllister, thanks for being with us. You are the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Parliament, and as such, you've been following the war in Ukraine very closely since the beginning. We're now almost 1 year into this war. Did you ever think it was going to last this long?
I guess every one of us was totally shocked on the 24th of February when the Russian invasion, the fully fledged invasion of Ukraine began, or as people in Ukraine would say, the second stage of the war, which already began in 2014. I guess nobody would have predicted this outcome. What we've seen is that the Ukrainians have been tremendously brave in defending their country, their freedom, their liberty, but they're not only defending their own country, they're defending European values.
And how would you say that this war has been changing the global geopolitics, and Europe in particular?
War has come back to our continent. This is a military escalation, a fully fledged war, which a lot of us probably would have considered being unimaginable. This is not only a war of the largest country in Europe, the Russian Federation, against the second largest country by size, Ukraine. This is a fully fledged attack, a brutal, violent attack on the European peace and security architecture. And we have to be very clear in condemning the actions of the Russian Federation under Mr. Putin, who is a dictator, and he is at the helm of a terrorist regime.
Would you say that the European Union was too naive towards Russia and towards Putin?
Well, looking back, you always know what could have been done better. I think what we saw was in recent years that some of our member states were too dependent on Russian energy imports. This has been corrected, and 2014, the illegal annexation of Crimea should have been a real warning signal that this man in the Kremlin has a plan, and this plan has been announced through a number of interviews and speeches throughout the last 10, 15 years. In the Kremlin, in the end, Mr. Putin and his entourage have this concept of spheres of interest, a concept of the 19th or 20th century, that everything which used to be the Russian Empire until 1917 or the Soviet Union until 1991, 1992 is obviously a Russian sphere of influence, and that is totally bizarre. That's why if we support Ukraine now, it's also about giving a clear signal to the Russian dictator that this shouldn't happen again.
And what could have been done differently back then when Russia invaded Crimea?
We should have adopted more sanctions, harsher sanctions, to make Mr. Putin very clear that this is totally unacceptable. But we already started in 2014 training the Ukrainian military, giving them the necessary equipment. And one of the reasons why the Ukrainians were so successful in pushing the Russians back, especially from the front line in the north, was also that already they had been trained by NATO partners.
And precisely about arms, Parliament has been asking for an increase of the military assistance to Ukraine. Now European countries are preparing to send tanks to the country. Is this enough? Does it come in a right time?
The EU members, the 27, and our Western allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Australia, just to mention a few, we have shown such determination on the one hand and coherence on the other hand, like probably never ever before. The West is united, the European Union is united. We are united in giving Ukraine economic, financial, humanitarian support and also military support. For the first time, we are giving weapons to a third country to help them defend their territory and their people. And on the other hand, we've been very united in putting maximum pressure on the Russian Federation to end this war through now 9 sanctions packages which have been adopted.
Would the Parliament continue to ask for more military assistance?
Well, we as a European Union don't give direct military assistance. What we have done is now to use sums from the European Peace Facility to let the Ukrainians buy ammunition and other weaponry. But the member states have been delivering weapons and they are continuing to deliver weapons. And what we need now is to give the Ukrainians what they need most. That is air defense systems, long-range artillery, and modern Western battle tanks. And that's what the whole debate is about now. I welcome that member states have now decided to deliver Leopard tanks to Ukraine. It was a complicated operation. Perhaps the decision could have been taken earlier, but now we have a solution, and the German government has announced to send the first 14 Leopard tanks. The UK government is sending 14 Challenger tanks, and other countries like the Netherlands, Norway or Poland will follow.
It will come on time before the major spring operation that is being expected from Russia, right?
Well, that's what experts are predicting, that there will be a spring offensive, and what we need to do now is to simply give the Ukrainians what they need, because they are incredibly brave women and men who are out there on the front line defending, once again, not only their own country, but our European values and the entire European peace and security architecture.
Now Russia has responded to this announcement of the tanks with more threats, threatening even to attack countries that would send those tanks to Ukraine. And how seriously should these threats be taken?
Well, you should never underestimate announcements of the Russian dictator, including his threats. That's part of his strategy. But these threats have just one real meaning: to frighten people in our member states, to frighten our society, and to undermine the huge wave of support for Ukraine. And the response of the West has been very clear, that in NATO, we are in this together, and an attack on one NATO member state would be an attack on all NATO member states. And President Putin is very aware of that. And he's already overstretched his military means in Ukraine.
Would you say that this war also made, in a certain way, NATO to regain force?
Well, what we've seen is that now that war has come back to our continent, sadly so, that geopolitics has come back with a vengeance. And we are experiencing, as the German Chancellor said, a Zeitenwende. We're going through a geopolitical shift. And of course, questions of security and defense play a very different role, a much more important role than a couple of years ago. What have we seen in the last 12 months? Sweden and Finland want to join NATO. Denmark is now in the Security and Defense Cooperation of the European Union after a successful referendum. And a country like Germany has finally announced that they want to actually fulfill the 2% spending target on defense, which was already agreed in 2014. So what we're seeing is security and defense has become a very, very big relevance for obvious reasons. And what is important for us in the European Union, and this is where the European Parliament has always been a strong actor, we are in favor of a closer European security and defense cooperation. We want Europe to do more here. We believe that the strategic compass adopted by the heads of government last year is the way forward, a kind of a white book towards a European defense union. But let me also add, whatever we do in Europe should never be in competition with NATO, duplicating NATO capabilities, or even be against NATO. No, it's about strengthening the European pillar within the established framework of NATO.
Parliament has recently called for a war crimes tribunal to prosecute Russia's actions in Ukraine. What does it take for such a tribunal to become reality?
What we have witnessed in Ukraine reminds us of the darkest chapters of European history. We have seen outrageous war crimes. It is so shocking what the Russian forces have done to kill civilians, to rape women, to torture innocent people. These are war crimes, and people responsible for this are war criminals. And there's only one place for war criminals in the end, that they are held to account in front of an international war crime tribunal. That's why the European Parliament is very much in favor, like many national parliaments, that we establish a special tribunal for these war crimes committed by the Russian armed forces in Ukraine. And it's very important now that we document carefully all the war crimes that have been committed, so we have enough material when it comes to these trials. And I hope very much, I pray, that one day Mr. Putin and others will be held to account for what they have committed in Ukraine.
But who would have to decide on setting up such a tribunal?
Well, this is a complicated process. For legal reasons, the International Court in The Hague cannot be responsible for these kind of trials, and that's why we're in a situation that we have to create something new. And the legal details have not been discussed yet, but there's political will in the international community, in the Western world, to actually create this kind of institution, that it is not forgotten what happened. Once again, the pictures we have seen from Irpin, Bucha, and other places are so shocking. They remind us of the darkest hours of European history during the Second World War. And that's why these people responsible for that, they need to be taken to court.
And what is the role that you see for the European Union on the reconstruction and the recovery of Ukraine after the war? Or is it too early to talk about that already?
Well, in the moment, we are by far the largest donor for Ukraine. We are giving massive economic, financial, humanitarian support because we know under which dire pressure the people in Ukraine are. And Ukraine is an immediate neighbor of us. This is a European country. Ukraine has a European perspective. Ukraine has been granted EU candidate status, and we will be ready to help reconstruct Ukraine as soon as this war is over. And Ukraine knows that there can be no closer partner next to the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom than the EU 27.
European Parliament has already sent some very concrete and immediate help to Ukraine, right? Like to help Ukrainian Rada to continue working during the first days of the war.
Well, right from the beginning, the European Parliament said we want to have a close cooperation with the Verkhovna Rada. I mean, the contacts between the Verkhovna Rada and the European Parliament have been there before, and we provided technical assistance, especially in the first few weeks and months where parliamentarians had to do their work under incredible circumstances. We all can't imagine in the European Union having to do your political work while your own capital is being shelled and bombed by the Russian armed forces. So we will continue to support the Verkhovna Rada. We have very close contacts and we will continue to do so. And it's also important that we have these contacts with the ruling party, but also with the opposition. And one of the main differences between Ukraine and Russia is Ukraine is a democracy. You have parliamentary elections in Ukraine which actually don't have a predictable outcome. It's actually a competition. We have seen changes of power in a democratic transition in Ukraine. And that's why Ukraine is a democratic partner for us in the EU 27.
We saw in the latest Eurobarometer survey that Europeans are still supporting all of the EU response to the war and support to Ukraine, but they're also increasingly worried about how this war has been affecting their daily lives, especially the rise of prices of energy. So there is a risk of war fatigue setting in. For how long will the European Union be able to continue supporting Ukraine?
Of course, this war is affecting also our citizens in the European Union. The rising energy prices you mentioned, the inflation rate, other things. But compared to the burden the Ukrainian people, the brave Ukrainian people are sharing, where millions of mothers with their children have been forced to leave the country, where the men can't leave the country, but they have to fight at the front line against the Russian invaders, it's, compared to Ukraine, a rather soft burden we have to share. And it is remarkable how big the unity is among Western societies. My impression is that the citizens in the EU know very well if the Russian dictator succeeds in Ukraine, this will not be the end of this kind of politics. He has announced that other countries will be targeted by him. Let's think of Moldova or Georgia, two countries who dare to, in quote unquote, dared to have a pro-European, Euro-Atlantic integration policy. And the Russian Federation is a dangerous country. It's a dangerous regime. It's a heavily armed nuclear power. And the big challenge for us in Europe will be how to tackle with a Russian Federation mid and long term, as long as somebody like Mr. Putin is responsible in the Kremlin. And that will be the big challenge, and that's why we need to remain our unity.
So the support will continue for as long as it takes?
We will support Ukraine as long as it takes. And in the end, every war will come to an end. For a war to come to an end, ceasefire negotiations are the first step. But the Russian Federation is talking about the necessity of peace and ceasefire. And on the other hand, the Russian Federation is the one that are sending more and more troops to the front line. They are shelling Ukrainian cities. They are attacking civilian infrastructure. I fully understand that the Ukrainian leadership is not trusting the Russian leadership a single second. And that's why we will continue to support Ukraine in their defense of this barbaric war of aggression of the Russian Federation. And when the conditions are there, then a ceasefire can happen, and then this might lead to peace. I pray that there will be peace, but it has to be a peace which is not equivalent to a Russian dictate peace.
Thank you very much. From the Virtus Museum in Brussels, I'm Marcia Bizzotto, and this is David McAllister, the Chair of Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. Thank you.